December 22, 1944, somewhere in the frozen forests of Belgium, American soldiers trapped inside Bastogne listened to German artillery shake the earth beneath them. Snow covered everything. The roads had disappeared under ice, food was running low, ammunition was becoming precious, German tanks closed in from every direction.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Many officers believed Bastogne would fall within days. Across the German front, experienced commanders looked at their maps and reached the same conclusion. Even if General George S. Patton wanted to help, there simply was not enough time. His Third Army was more than 100 miles away, facing a completely different direction. Turning an entire field army in the middle of winter, then driving it across frozen roads while a massive enemy offensive was underway, seemed impossible. Not difficult. Impossible, yet less than 2 days later, German officers were staring through binoculars at American tanks arriving where they should never have been. The question is not whether Patton reached Bastogne. History already tells us that. The real mystery is how thousands of vehicles, tens of thousands of soldiers, and mountains of fuel and ammunition covered 101 miles in just 47 hours when military logic said it could not be done. The Battle of the Bulge had exploded on December 16, 1944. Before sunrise, Adolf Hitler launched his final major offensive in Western Europe. Nearly 250,000 German troops attacked through the Ardennes forest, hoping to split the Allied armies and capture the vital port of Antwerp. Thick fog and heavy snow grounded Allied aircraft. German armor pushed through thin American lines. Entire headquarters struggled to understand what was happening. Roads became crowded with retreating units, refugees, and supply trucks moving in every direction. In the middle of this confusion stood Bastogne, a small Belgian town that looked unimportant on the map but controlled 7 major roads. Whoever held Bastogne controlled movement across much of the Ardennes. Inside Bastogne, the American 101st Airborne Division, led by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, while Major General Maxwell Taylor was away, found itself surrounded. Reinforcements from Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division added strength, but the situation remained desperate. Medical supplies disappeared quickly. Winter clothing was limited. Temperatures stayed below freezing. German artillery struck the town day and night. Every hour that passed made relief less likely. Far to the south, General George S. Patton commanded the U.S. Third Army. His headquarters was near Luxembourg, preparing for an entirely different offensive toward the Saar region of Germany. Thousands of trucks were already loaded with fuel, artillery shells, food, bridge equipment, and spare parts for operations heading east. Every supply route had been planned in advance. Every engineer unit knew its assignment. Every maintenance crew expected to support an attack into Germany, not a sudden rescue mission hundreds of miles away. Then came December 19. At Verdun, the senior Allied commanders gathered for an emergency conference. General Dwight D. Eisenhower needed answers. The German attack had created a dangerous bulge in the Allied front. Someone had to strike its southern flank. Many commanders needed time to study maps and calculate possibilities. Patton had already done both. Before attending the meeting, he had quietly ordered his staff to prepare 3 different plans for turning the Third Army north. His operations officer, Major General Hugh Gaffey, and Colonel Oscar Koch from Intelligence had spent long hours examining every road, every bridge, and every possible route. Patton expected the unexpected. While others reacted to the crisis, his headquarters had already begun solving it. When Eisenhower asked how soon the Third Army could attack north, Patton answered with complete confidence. He said he could begin within 48 hours. Several officers around the table thought they had misunderstood him. Entire armies did not change direction that quickly. Corps headquarters had to move. Fuel dumps had to be relocated. Traffic plans had to be rewritten. Artillery needed new firing positions. Medical stations had to move. Signal units had to establish fresh communications. Engineers had to inspect bridges. Military police had to redirect thousands of vehicles. The answer sounded more like a boast than a military plan. But inside Third Army headquarters, the impossible had already become a checklist. The greatest obstacle was not German resistance. It was logistics. The Third Army depended on an enormous network that stretched back through France. Every Sherman tank consumed huge amounts of fuel. Every artillery battery required thousands of shells. Trucks burned gasoline almost continuously during long marches. A single delay at one fuel point could stop an entire column behind it. If one bridge failed, traffic could back up for miles. Success depended on thousands of small jobs being completed almost perfectly. Orders spread rapidly through headquarters during the afternoon of December 19. Supply officers immediately began redirecting fuel trucks north instead of east. Quartermasters reorganized ammunition deliveries. Engineers packed bridge equipment in case German demolitions blocked key crossings. Recovery vehicles prepared to tow broken tanks away before they could block narrow roads. Mechanics worked through freezing nights, replacing worn tracks, repairing engines, checking transmissions, and fixing electrical systems weakened by the cold. The weather made every task harder. Snow continued falling across much of Luxembourg and Belgium. Ice covered roads that twisted through forests and small villages. Visibility often dropped sharply. Drivers could not simply speed toward Bastogne. Convoys stretched for miles, and one careless mistake could send heavy trucks into ditches or create traffic jams lasting hours. Patton understood something many commanders overlooked. An army moved only as fast as its slowest vehicle. That meant every truck mattered. Every maintenance crew mattered. Every traffic controller standing in freezing intersections mattered. Winning the race to Bastogne required thousands of ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary work without expecting recognition. Military police became some of the most important men in the entire operation. They stood at crossroads in bitter cold, waving endless columns through carefully planned routes. Some intersections handled tanks, trucks, ambulances, artillery tractors, jeeps, and engineers almost continuously. One wrong turn could send hundreds of vehicles onto the wrong road. Officers constantly updated movement schedules to prevent different divisions from blocking each other. The lead formation would be Major General Manton S. Eddy's Corps? No. Plans changed as priorities shifted. The relief of Bastogne would fall primarily to Lieutenant General Troy H. Middleton's the 8th Corps defending the sector, and, for the attack itself, Major General John S. Wood's 4th Armored Division under 3 Corps, commanded by Major General John Milliken. The 26th Infantry Division and the 80th Infantry Division would support the advance. Every division received clear objectives, but moving them into position required incredible precision. Thousands of vehicles had to arrive in exactly the right order. Fuel first, ammunition second. Combat units close behind, engineers where bridges might fail. Medical teams close enough to respond, but not so close they blocked advancing armor. By December 20, the roads had become rivers of steel. Sherman tanks rumbled north, with white frost covering their hulls. Half-tracks carried infantry wrapped in heavy winter coats. Tank destroyers bounced across frozen roads. Long lines of trucks hauled gasoline in jerry cans and fuel tankers. Others carried artillery ammunition stacked from floor to roof. Kitchen trucks followed behind with field rations. Ambulances waited farther back, ready for casualties that had not yet happened. German aircraft rarely appeared because the Luftwaffe had been weakened, but the weather remained a relentless enemy. Engines refused to start in freezing temperatures. Drivers fought fatigue after long hours without sleep. Mechanics climbed beneath icy vehicles to repair broken suspensions and frozen fuel lines. Every minute counted, because the men inside Bastogne had no extra time left. American engineers raced ahead of the main columns, checking bridges for weight limits. A damaged bridge could stop heavy tanks completely. If necessary, engineers prepared temporary crossings using portable bridge equipment carried on specialized trucks. Their work rarely appeared in newspaper headlines, yet without them Patton's advance could have stalled before reaching the front. Communication crews also faced enormous pressure. Telephone lines had to be laid across changing headquarters locations. Radio operators struggled with overloaded networks as thousands of messages moved between corps, divisions, regiments, and battalions. Orders changed constantly because traffic conditions changed constantly. Headquarters needed an accurate picture every hour. A column delayed by snow in one village could force another division onto a different route entirely. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's soldiers had no idea exactly where relief forces were. They continued holding road junctions against repeated German attacks. Ammunition was carefully rationed. Artillery crews counted shells before firing. Medics treated wounded men inside overcrowded aid stations where blankets were often as valuable as medicine. German commanders believed time was on their side. What they could not see was the enormous machine moving toward them through the winter darkness. It was not simply Patton giving orders. It was drivers refusing to stop, mechanics refusing to quit, engineers refusing to accept broken bridges, fuel crews refusing to let tanks run dry, military police refusing to let traffic collapse into chaos. Every mile north proved the impossible was slowly becoming reality. As December 21 drew to a close, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division pushed ever closer to the German lines south of Bastogne. The hardest part of the journey was now about to begin. The long march had succeeded, but reaching the surrounded town meant breaking through determined German defenses that fully expected any American relief effort to arrive days later. Not now. The race against time was almost over. The battle to finish it was just beginning. The morning of December 22, 1944, arrived with the same bitter cold that had followed the soldiers for days. Thick frost covered the fields of southern Belgium. The trees stood silent under fresh snow while the roads echoed with the sound of tank tracks and truck engines. After completing one of the fastest operational movements of the war, Patton's Third Army now faced the challenge that every mile of the march had been leading toward. Reaching Bastogne was no longer a question of distance. It was now a fight through determined German defenses that had no reason to expect an American attack from the south so soon. German commanders remained confident. Their intelligence estimated that any large American relief force would need several more days before it could even organize such a movement. They believed the winter weather, damaged roads, and endless logistical problems would slow Patton, just as they would slow any other army. General Hasso von Manteuffel and other experienced German officers understood how difficult it was to move armored divisions across the Ardennes. Their own advance had already suffered from fuel shortages, traffic jams, and blocked roads. Looking at the same battlefield, they reached the logical conclusion that Patton could not possibly move any faster. What they underestimated was not American equipment. It was American organization. Every gallon of fuel loaded days earlier was now proving its value. Every mechanic who had repaired a frozen engine during the night had kept another vehicle moving. Every military policeman standing in freezing intersections had prevented massive traffic jams. Every engineer who had inspected bridges had saved precious hours. The dramatic charge toward Bastogne was actually the final result of thousands of invisible decisions made by ordinary soldiers whose names would never appear in history books. Leading the attack was Major General Hugh Gaffey's 4th Armored Division. At the front, Combat Command R pushed north through villages defended by determined German troops. Sherman tanks exchanged fire with German anti-tank guns hidden along narrow roads. Infantry moved carefully through woods where every tree could conceal an enemy position. The snow made movement difficult, but it also reflected enough light for soldiers to continue fighting even as daylight faded. The Germans fought hard because they understood Bastogne's importance. Every hour they delayed the Americans gave their own forces more time to tighten the ring around the town. Roadblocks appeared behind destroyed vehicles. Bridges were defended wherever possible. Artillery fired on crossroads where American columns gathered before moving forward again. Patton's advance did not become a straight line. It became a series of brutal local battles, each one opening another section of road. Engineers cleared obstacles while recovery crews dragged damaged vehicles aside so the next wave could continue. Supply trucks followed as closely as safety allowed, bringing fresh ammunition and fuel almost as quickly as the front line consumed them. The weather remained cruel. Cold steel burned bare hands, rifle bolts froze, tank crews slept whenever they could, often inside vehicles with engines turned off to save fuel. Drivers who had already spent 2 days on the road now found themselves entering combat without proper rest. Fatigue became another enemy, but stopping was not an option. Inside Bastogne, the situation continued to worsen. German artillery pounded the town almost without pause. Medical stations overflowed with wounded soldiers. Doctors and medics worked with limited supplies, often reusing equipment because replacements simply did not exist. Food was rationed carefully. Ammunition became so valuable that officers reminded their men to fire only when targets were certain. Yet, morale inside Bastogne remained remarkably strong. Only 2 days earlier, on December 22, German representatives had delivered a surrender demand to Brigadier General Anthony mcauliffe. His famous one-word reply, "nuts," quickly spread through the American lines. It became more than a response. It became a symbol that the defenders intended to hold no matter how desperate the situation became. But determination alone could not stop German armor forever. They still needed help. By December 23, the weather finally began to change. The skies slowly cleared after days of thick cloud. Allied aircraft returned in force. Cargo planes dropped desperately needed ammunition, food, medical supplies, and winter clothing into Bastogne. Fighter bombers attacked German positions and supply routes throughout the Ardennes. The improvement in weather helped every Allied formation, but Patton's ground forces still had to fight their way through the final miles. South of Bastogne, the 4th Armored Division pressed forward village by village. German resistance remained fierce, but the momentum had changed. American commanders knew exactly what was waiting inside the surrounded town, and every hour increased the urgency. Finally, on December 26, 1944, after days of relentless fighting, the moment arrived. Near the village of Assenois, tanks and infantry from the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division broke through the final German positions. Late that afternoon, the leading American tank rolled toward Bastogne. For the exhausted defenders inside the town, it was an unforgettable sight. The siege had not completely ended because German forces still surrounded much of the area, but a narrow corridor had finally been opened. Fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements could now begin reaching the trapped garrison. Bastogne had survived. The relief of Bastogne quickly became one of the defining moments of the Battle of the Bulge, but many people remembered only the dramatic finish. They remembered Patton's confidence. They remembered McAuliffe's famous reply. They remembered the tanks entering the town. What they often overlooked was everything that happened before those tanks appeared. Nearly every vehicle involved had been redirected from another mission. Thousands of soldiers had marched, driven, repaired, loaded, unloaded, refueled, navigated, and organized almost continuously through freezing weather. Staff officers rewrote operational plans overnight. Signal units kept communications functioning despite constant movement. Quartermasters somehow ensured that fuel reached advancing columns instead of empty fields. Engineers prevented rivers and damaged bridges from becoming dead ends. Military police controlled traffic so efficiently that entire armored divisions avoided the kind of gridlock that could have delayed the operation for days. That hidden logistical victory impressed military professionals around the world. Even German officers who had fought the Americans for years understood how extraordinary it had been. They knew from their own experience that moving a large mechanized army was one of the hardest tasks in modern warfare. Tanks could not move without fuel. Fuel could not move without trucks. Trucks could not move without clear roads. Roads could not remain open without engineers and traffic control. Remove one piece from that chain, and the entire operation slowed to a crawl. Patton's achievement was not based on luck. Months before the Battle of the Bulge, the Third Army had already earned a reputation for moving faster than expected. During the breakout from Normandy in August 1944, Patton's formations crossed France with remarkable speed, often advancing farther in a single day than many armies expected in several days. Those earlier campaigns forced his headquarters to become experts in rapid movement, flexible planning, and aggressive logistics. When the crisis at Bastogne arrived, the Third Army already possessed habits that had been built through months of constant campaigning. Patton himself demanded speed from every level of command. He expected decisions to be made quickly. He encouraged initiative instead of delay. Officers knew that excuses would not solve problems. Broken vehicles had to be repaired. Missing supplies had to be found. Blocked roads had to be cleared. Waiting was rarely acceptable. That culture spread throughout the army. The famous 101-mile march was therefore not the work of one remarkable general acting alone. It was the combined effort of thousands of drivers, mechanics, engineers, radio operators, cooks, medics, military police, staff officers, artillery crews, infantrymen, and tank crews who all understood that every lost minute increased the danger for the men trapped inside Bastogne. Military historians still study this operation because it demonstrated something larger than battlefield courage. It showed that logistics is not simply about moving supplies. Logistics decides whether armies arrive in time to change history. The fastest tank is useless without fuel. The bravest infantry unit cannot fight without ammunition. The greatest commander cannot succeed if food, repairs, transportation, and communication fail behind him. That is why so many German commanders later described Patton's movement as something they had believed impossible, looking only at the distance, the weather, the road conditions, and the size of the force involved. Their conclusion was perfectly reasonable. By every normal calculation, turning an entire field army and driving it more than 100 miles through winter conditions in roughly 47 hours should not have happened. But history is filled with moments when preparation defeats probability. The march to Bastogne was not a miracle. It was the result of relentless planning, disciplined leadership, experienced staff work, and thousands of ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary tasks under impossible pressure. When people remember Bastogne, they often picture the snow-covered town, the surrounded paratroopers and Patton's tanks arriving at the perfect moment. Yet the real story began far behind the front line, where mechanics tightened frozen bolts before sunrise, engineers checked bridges in the dark, truck drivers followed icy roads without rest, and military police stood for endless hours directing traffic through freezing crossroads. Those men rarely appeared in photographs. Few newspapers mentioned their names. Most returned home without becoming famous. But without them, Patton's tanks would never have reached Bastogne. 101 miles in 47 hours was never just a march. It was proof that the strongest weapon in a modern army is not always the tank, the artillery gun, or the fighter aircraft. Sometimes, the strongest weapon is an organization so disciplined, so prepared, and so determined that it accomplishes what even experienced enemy generals believe cannot be done. That is why, more than 80 years later, the race to Bastogne remains one of the greatest logistical achievements of the Second World War. A victory built not only by famous commanders, but by thousands of ordinary soldiers whose relentless effort turned an impossible mission into one of history's most remarkable triumphs.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.